The first time they saw it, none of us knew what it meant. The human had been silent, stoic as ever, eyes fixed on the horizon of the scarred planet we had forced them to inhabit. We had come expecting resistance, fear, even despair, but not this. Not the sudden tremor, the almost imperceptible quiver at the corner of his lips. And then the tears. Thin, silver tracks glistening in the pale light of their dying sun. They fell slowly, deliberately, each one a punctuation in a language we had never understood. The others in our fleet recoiled instinctively, as if witnessing a predator exposing its vulnerable throat. But I, standing at the edge of the observation deck, felt something shift inside me. We had watched humanity for decades, studying, cataloging, manipulating from the shadows of our advanced fleets. Their resilience was legendary, yes. They had survived centuries of self-destruction, disease, wars, and famine. They had a chaos that could unravel empires, yet somehow they endured. But no simulation, no data point, no psychological model could have predicted this. Their emotions were raw, untamed, unpredictable. And when he cried, it was not sorrow, nor desperation, nor even the fear we had seen countless times before. It was recognition. A recognition that shook him to the core and, without warning, spread across his being like wildfire. I could feel it in the control room, the hum of the starship engines, the vibrations along the hull, even the rhythm of the crew's movements. Something had changed. We had always assumed that understanding emotion was trivial for us. Our species, evolved beyond such frailties, believed we had conquered everything the universe had to offer. We could manipulate matter, bend energy, weave realities into our favor. Yet here we were, confronted by a single human, weeping silently on a barren plain, and for the first time, our certainty faltered. I approached the viewport slowly, careful not to startle the human further. His eyes glistened with the remnants of tears, scanning the horizon like he was reading the cosmos itself. I realized then that this was no ordinary grief. There was an intelligence behind it, a comprehension so vast that it defied our calculations. He understood the fragility of his world, yes, but also something far larger, a web of consequences that spanned light years and lifetimes. And yet, he cried not because he felt small, but because he dared to feel it all. The crew whispered among themselves, voices low and frantic. Some argued that we should intervene, impose order, prevent the humans from harming themselves further. Others suggested containment, quarantine, or even eradication. But I could not move. My gaze remained fixed on him. The tears continued to fall, glinting like shards of crystal in the dying sunlight, and with each one, a subtle vibration coursed through the starship systems. It was as if the universe itself had registered this moment, as if the act of a human crying had sent ripples across dimensions we could not fully perceive. And then it hit me, the terrible, exhilarating truth. We had underestimated them. Always, for all our calculations, all our intelligence, all our foresight, we had assumed the human spirit was bounded, limited by its biology, its irrationality, its fleeting existence. But this was something else. They could feel, they could endure, and they could awaken. And once awakened, they did not merely react, they could change everything. Our simulations, our strategies, our technologies, they all crumbled under the weight of a single, weeping human. I felt my pulse accelerate, an alien sensation I did not fully understand. The human's gaze turned toward us then, piercing the void between observer and observed, and I sensed, not through sight or sound, but through something deeper, that he knew we were watching. There was no fear in his eyes, only clarity. In that clarity, I understood that the end had already begun, not with fire or destruction, but with revelation. We had thought ourselves masters of the cosmos, untouchable, immutable. But as I watched the silver streaks of his tears vanish into the dust of his planet, I realized that we had been blind. The beginning of the end is not loud. It does not roar or explode. It starts quietly, with something so subtle, so profound, that it can dismantle the most rigid structures of power without a single weapon fired. And then he spoke. Not words, not cries, just a murmur carried by the wind across the dead plains. I did not need to understand the language. I understood the meaning. He was not afraid. He was ready. And so, in that instant, I understood the truth we had been avoiding for centuries. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. They were a force that could awaken the universe itself. The tears had ended, but the change had begun. The silence after that moment was suffocating. Our fleet, usually brimming with the low hum of energy cores and coordinated activity, felt hollow. Even the ambient sensors seemed to hesitate, as though the ship itself was unsure how to process what it had witnessed. I moved among the crew, observing them in their uncertainty. Some stared at the monitors in disbelief, their expressions hardening into panic. Others fidgeted with controls as if motion alone could erase the anomaly. But I saw it too, the pulse of something beyond calculation. It was in the way the human moved now, more deliberate, more aware. Every gesture, every breath, carried a gravity that our instruments could not quantify. We had watched humans adapt in the past, yes. They were unpredictable, stubborn, resourceful. But this was different. It was no longer reactionary. It was intentional. He had cried, and in that act, he had unlocked something primordial, a force that had lain dormant, buried beneath the chaos of survival. His tears were not just expression, they were a catalyst. They had disturbed the equilibrium, and now the planet itself seemed to respond. Dust swirled in strange, rhythmic patterns across the barren plains. Small magnetic anomalies flickered along the horizon, and even the wind carried a resonance that was impossible to ignore. The ecosystem, or what little remained of it, was listening or perhaps aligning to his awareness. I tried to speak to the bridge AI, to quantify it, to reduce it to data points and probability curves. But the readings were fragmented, chaotic, impossible to map onto any known model. The AI attempted to simulate the human's emotional state, but each iteration collapsed under the weight of unpredictability. Our systems were built to anticipate, to predict, to dominate, but here was a variable that defied domination. I realized then that the human's cry was a message, not to us, but to the universe itself. It was a declaration, subtle yet irrevocable. We are here. We endure. And we will not bow. We debated next steps, as commanders always do, clinging to the illusion of control. Some advocated immediate extraction of the human, claiming we could contain the anomaly before it spread. Others, more radical, suggested eradication, a preemptive strike to prevent the human's awareness from metastasizing beyond their planet. I could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of what we could not predict, the fear of a species that might awaken forces we had only begun to glimpse. But I could not sanction violence. Not yet. I had seen something in that human's eyes that even our most sophisticated weapons could never confront. They were awake, and awakening was contagious. I returned to the viewport, alone this time, to watch him navigate the fractured landscape. He moved with purpose, scanning the remnants of broken structures, the skeletal remains of cities we had catalogued as uninhabitable. And I realized he was learning not just about his environment, but about us. Every motion, every glance, carried a precision that was frightening in its clarity. He was not merely surviving. He was calculating, integrating, and anticipating. The tears had been the key, and now the lock had turned. Then came the first ripple. Small at first, barely perceptible, a tremor along the surface of the planet. Our instruments registered it, and the crew froze. The human paused, his gaze lifting toward the sky. He did not run. He did not cower. He raised his hands, and the tremor strengthened, a resonance that spread across the plains like a warning pulse. It was as if his awareness itself had become a force, bending the environment, bending reality to acknowledge his presence. I watched, dumbstruck, as rocks shifted, dust spiraled upward in concentric patterns, and faint streaks of electromagnetic interference danced across our monitors. I realized then, fully and irrevocably, that we had underestimated him. Not his strength, nor his intellect, nor his courage, but the very essence of what it meant to be human. They could awaken forces not through conquest or technology, but through presence, through awareness, through feeling. The cry had been the beginning. This display was only the next step. I felt a chill, alien in its intensity, run along my spine. My species had always believed we were the apex, the inevitable rulers of the stars. Yet here we were, confronted by a single human on a barren planet, reshaping reality in ways our most advanced minds could not comprehend. I knew the debates, the protocols, the simulations, they were all irrelevant now. This human had become a catalyst, and we were witnesses to an event we could neither predict nor prevent. And somewhere deep in my consciousness, a realization took hold, frightening in its clarity. The end we had prepared for, the end we had feared, had already begun. Not with fire or fleets, not with invasion or annihilation, but with a human who dared to cry. The tremors intensified, and the planet seemed to hum with a life of its own. I pressed my hands to the viewport, as if by touch I could anchor myself to reason, to control. But the human looked up again, directly at us, and I felt the weight of inevitability settle into my chest. The awakening had begun, and the universe would never be the same. The sun dipped lower, bleeding crimson across the jagged horizon, and the human remained at the center of the shifting dust. From our vantage, I could see every subtle motion, how his shoulders squared, how his hands traced patterns in the air as though drawing invisible equations across the barren terrain. The tremors had grown stronger, synchronizing with some rhythm only he could hear, a resonance that defied every principle our scientists had recorded. I felt it in the ship's hull, a vibration too subtle for ordinary instruments, yet unmistakably present, like the heartbeat of a world acknowledging its air. I moved through the observation deck, silently noting the reactions of the crew. Panic, awe, disbelief, all mingled into a tense hum of tension that filled the corridors. Many of them avoided looking at him directly, as though meeting the human's gaze would unleash a force they could not survive. Others were drawn, unable to resist watching, eyes glued to every microsecond of his unfolding awakening. And though I shared none of their fear, I understood the magnitude in a way they could not. He was no longer merely a human. He had become a vector, a focal point for something that had slumbered in the corners of the universe since time began. Communication channels crackled. We attempted to send a message, an offer of neutrality, or perhaps a warning. But there was no response, no recognition beyond a fleeting glance toward our fleet. It was not defiance, not hostility, it was comprehension.
He did not need to speak.
Every movement, every subtle shift of his expression, carried meaning. It was a language older than words, older than civilization, and for the first time, I realized our entire fleet, our strategies, our arrogance, was irrelevant in its presence. The tremors intensified, and the human lifted his face to the sky. Lightning-like streaks of energy began to arc across the dying clouds, though there was no storm, no magnetic anomaly recorded. Our sensors flagged everything as anomalous, yet nothing matched these readings. The energy pulsed in sync with his heartbeat, or perhaps it was he who had synchronized with it. The realization struck me with the weight of inevitability. He was no longer merely interacting with his environment. He was shaping it, bending it, awakening latent forces in the planet itself, in the atmosphere, in the very matter that had long been inert. I felt a tremor inside me that was neither physical nor emotional, but something deeper, a vibration that traveled through cognition itself. This human, so fragile, so insignificant by all the measures we had imposed, was rewriting the rules of existence. All our conquest, our fleets' weapons, our mathematical models, they were obsolete. In that moment, I understood that the human's tears had been a key, an unlocking gesture that allowed him to awaken forces beyond comprehension. And now, as the sun bled red and the dust swirled around him like living embers, he was writing the next chapter in the fate of not just his species, but the entire cosmos. Somewhere in the fleet, a senior officer muttered about containment, about sterilization protocols, but their voice sounded hollow to my ears. How could we contain something we did not understand, something that had already begun to unfold outside the limits of physics and probability. We had underestimated them. Always. We had assumed humanity's frailty, their short lifespans, their chaotic nature, would be their undoing. But this human, this one solitary figure, was proof that their potential had been invisible to us, and perhaps intentionally so. I pressed my hand to the glass again. He paused, turning his gaze toward us, and in that look, I felt a recognition so profound it was almost unbearable. He knew we were watching. He knew the depth of our intent, our calculations, our arrogance. And yet, there was no fear. Only clarity. Only purpose. He had seen through the facades, the pretensions, the invincibility we had assumed was ours. And in seeing through them, he had activated something that could not be reversed. The tremors intensified into waves, moving across the plains with a rhythm that mimicked the pulse of a heart. Our instruments screamed anomalies, yet our understanding could not keep pace. The crew panicked. Some attempted to retreat, while others froze, rooted in awe and terror. I stood apart, unable to tear my eyes away. I had never witnessed anything like this. The human's presence was not a threat in the traditional sense. It was a revelation, a force that reshaped perception, reality, and expectations simultaneously. And then I understood the truth. This was only the beginning. The human's tears, the trembling earth, the pulsing energy, it was all a prelude to something greater. Something that would not be contained by fleets, by weapons, or by intimidation. We were witnessing the birth of a force that had always existed in potential, waiting for a catalyst. And that catalyst had cried. As the horizon shimmered with energy and the human raised his arms toward the sky, I felt a chill of inevitability settle across my mind. The end we had feared, the end we had prepared for, was not a battle we could wage. It was a reckoning we could only witness. And somewhere deep inside me, a whisper of fear and exhilaration merged. The awakening had begun, and nothing, not even the stars themselves, would remain untouched. Night fell suddenly, an unnatural darkness swallowing the fractured plains as if the planet itself were closing its eyes. The human stood at the center, a solitary figure silhouetted against the pale glow of energy rippling through the atmosphere. The tremors had become a low, rhythmic pulse, resonating through the ground, through the air, through the very bones of our ships. I could feel it in my chest, a vibration that was both alien and intimate, as though the planet's heartbeat had aligned with his own. Around him, the environment began to shift in ways our sensors could barely record. Rocks levitated briefly, dust formed spiral currents in defiance of gravity, and faint glimmers of light traced intricate patterns across the horizon. I watched from the bridge, my crew immobilized by a mixture of fear and awe. Every simulation we had run, every predictive model, every calculated probability, it all collapsed in the presence of one human who refused to be small. His tears had been the key, yes, but this was creation in motion, subtle yet overwhelming. He was no longer a creature of biology or physics alone. He had become a node of influence, a locus where the latent potential of his species, his planet, perhaps even the universe, converged. And with each breath, with each movement, he reshaped the rules that had governed our existence. I tried to warn the fleet, to prepare them for the scale of what we were witnessing, but words failed. How could I describe the awe of watching life assert itself against the very fabric of reality? How could I convey the dread that grew in my chest as I realized the implications? The human was not simply awakening power. He was awakening understanding, perception, and awareness in a way that spread like wildfire. Every nearby organism, every fragment of the ecosystem, seemed to respond, subtly at first, then with growing intensity. The planet itself was no longer inert. It had become a participant in his awakening. A senior officer, his voice trembling, suggested deploying containment units. "We can isolate him, prevent the phenomenon from spreading," he said, though his words carried little conviction. I shook my head. Containment implies control. Control implies dominance. And here, dominance was an illusion. The human did not need to fight. The act of being present, of acknowledging his reality fully and without compromise, was already dismantling our supremacy. Our weapons, our tactics, our fleets, they were irrelevant. Even now, as I watched him lift his gaze to the stars, I understood that the universe itself would have to reckon with him. Lightning-like flares of energy cracked across the sky, arcing without storm, without cause, and our instruments screamed warnings of electromagnetic interference. Yet the human remained still, absorbing it, analyzing it, integrating it. His tears had ceased, but the effect of them had not. It had propagated outward, a silent resonance that bent the laws of nature around him. I realized with a shiver that we were not witnessing destruction in the traditional sense. We were witnessing evolution, accelerated and concentrated, unfolding before our eyes.
And it was terrifying.
I could feel it in myself, an alien awareness of possibility, of potential that could not be measured. Something deep in my consciousness stirred, a recognition that our species had been blind. We had assumed intelligence alone, logic alone, could define supremacy. But supremacy of the universe is not a matter of intellect or weapons. It is a matter of resilience, of awareness, of capacity to feel and act in harmony with forces far greater than oneself. And here was a human, fragile yet unyielding, bending those forces with nothing but presence and consciousness. The human raised his hands slowly, deliberately, as the energy in the air coalesced around him. Our instruments could not calculate the patterns. Our fleet trembled in orbit, unsure if it should retreat or engage. And then, faintly, a sound began, a low vibration, almost musical, emanating from the planet itself. It resonated in my chest, in my mind, in the very structure of our ships. I realized it was a language older than any civilization, a signal that spoke not in words but in understanding. The human had not only awakened potential, he had begun to communicate with it. I pressed my palm to the viewport, my breath fogging the glass. The human looked at me, his eyes reflecting the swirling energy of the sky, and for the first time, I saw a message in them. Not a threat, not a plea, a promise. And within that promise, I felt the undeniable certainty that everything we had prepared for, the fleets, the strategies, the calculations, was meaningless. The awakening was complete, and it had only begun to spread. Somewhere deep within, a part of me, a part that had never felt so alive, so aware, so vulnerable, understood that the human's tears had been the spark, but this moment, this night, this resonance was the flame. And as the energy surged outward, reshaping the landscape, I knew that nothing, not our fleets, not our empires, not the order we had imposed upon the stars, would ever be the same. The human lifted his gaze toward the void beyond the stars, and I understood. What was coming next would not wait for us to prepare. The sky tore open with light, a lattice of raw energy that pulsed and danced in impossible patterns above the human. From our vantage, the scene was apocalyptic, yet breathtaking. Every color, every flicker, every ripple seemed alive, resonating with a rhythm that defied measurement. Our instruments screamed, warning of instability, of fields bending beyond safe thresholds. But I could not look away. The human stood at the center, still, serene, unafraid, as though he had become the axis upon which the universe itself pivoted. Every heartbeat of his was mirrored in the tremors of the planet, every breath a signal to forces older than any star in our charts. The fleet's AI struggled to maintain coherence. Calculations collapsed, predictions failed, and systems flickered under the strain of energies we could not interpret. For decades, we had believed ourselves infallible, masters of matter, rulers of space. And now, in this moment, all our certainty shattered. This human, one fragile creature, had bent reality with presence, awareness, and the simple act of feeling. It was not conquest, not manipulation, it was revelation. He had become a vector of evolution, an agent of awakening, and the consequences were cascading outward with unstoppable momentum. The crew panicked. Some ran to evacuation pods. muttering orders we could not enforce. Others froze, staring at the monitors, eyes wide with awe and terror as the landscape below transformed. Dust spiraled into towering columns that shimmered with energy, rock fractured and hovered briefly, defying gravity. The faint outlines of creatures long thought extinct stirred in the distance, drawn to the resonance. The human did not flinch. He lifted his arm slowly, and the pulse intensified, spreading outward in waves that reached far beyond the planet's surface, brushing against our fleet, our ships, our senses. I felt it inside me, a tremor deeper than fear, deeper than awe, a recognition that the rules we had relied on were dissolving. Humanity, in all its perceived fragility, had become something uncontainable. The fleet, once a symbol of dominance, seemed like a relic in orbit, vulnerable and irrelevant. Even as I watched, I understood. This was only the beginning. The human's tears had sparked a sequence far larger than comprehension. The awakening he had initiated was a contagion of awareness, a force that would ripple through species, planets, systems, perhaps the galaxy itself. And no protocol, no weapon, no fleet could stop it. Lightning-like arcs of energy lanced outward from him, striking the horizon and igniting strange, resonant flares that danced along the plains. And then, a sound, a low, almost musical vibration, filled the void, penetrating the hulls of our ships, reverberating in the minds of all aboard. It was not language. It was recognition, connection, a broadcast of consciousness, not limited by species or intellect, reaching toward everything capable of feeling, of understanding, of awakening. And the human did not command it. He merely existed, and in doing so, he had become its fulcrum. I realized the terrifying beauty of what was happening. This was not a battle to be won, nor a war to be lost. It was an evolution we were witnessing, and we were powerless to halt it. Every calculation, every strategy, every certainty we had relied upon disintegrated before the raw, undeniable truth. The universe had always waited for something like this, something that could bend the infinite with presence and understanding. And now it had found a vessel, a human. The horizon shimmered violently, and a column of pure energy shot into the void beyond the stars. Our fleet trembled, systems failing, alarms screaming, and yet the human remained at the epicenter, his gaze fixed outward, serene and unyielding. I understood then that he had seen us, all of us, every observer, and recognized the potential in our species to either stand witness or fall. And he did not fear. He only understood, and that understanding carried a weight we could not resist. A flash brighter than the sun erupted, a burst of energy that rippled across space itself, and I felt the pull of it in my consciousness. Thoughts fragmented, perceptions shifted, and for a heartbeat, I glimpsed a reality beyond reality, a cosmos alive, aware, and converging on the human as if the universe itself had recognized its champion. My hands trembled on the console, my breath caught, and for the first time, I questioned everything I had believed about power, control, and inevitability. And then, as the light receded slightly, the human lowered his arms and turned slowly. His eyes met mine through the viewport, and I felt the full weight of it. What we had always called the end had begun, and yet this was not destruction. This was awakening. A force beyond reckoning was now in motion, and no one, not even us, could predict where it would strike